Ever since 2014, when Michael Dew bought his home in San Diego's El Cerrito neighborhood, he's been a fixture at his block's parties and happy hours.
Allow me to leave this neighborhood. No. Who's gonna smoke the brisket?
But every now and then, something happens that reminds him that as a black man, he didn't always belong. Like the time an older neighbor mistook him as a gardener.
So I'm talking, and I was going to refill a drink. And an older woman, I wish I knew who she was, just kind of caught me off guard. And she says, "So are you one of the gardeners?" And I was like, why would a gardener be at a happy hour?
Years later, when reading over the 1950 deed of his ranch-style home, Dew figured out why his older neighbor might have said such a thing. The deed included a racially restrictive covenant.
That neither said lots nor any portion thereof shall ever be lived upon or occupied by any person other than of the Caucasian race, provided, however, that if persons not of the Caucasian race be kept therein by a Caucasian strictly in the capacity of servants or employees, actually engaged in the services of each occupant or in the care of said premises for said occupant, gardener.
For years, hired help was all he could have been in his home. Racially restrictive covenants were legal documents attached to deeds, subdivisions, and entire developments. They took off at the turn of the 20th century.
Even as early as by the 1927, they were on, 3/4 of the new homes in America and about half of all homes. So they spread very quickly and became a dominant way of limiting who could live where.
That's Gene Slater, an affordable housing specialist and author of Freedom to Discriminate. He says real estate brokers and developers created and enforced racially restrictive housing covenants across the nation.
They created a whole system, including all the other brokers in the city and the homeowners association, neighborhood associations, public officials who worked together to make certain a city or a neighborhood would remain all white.
San Diego was at the forefront of this national trend. A sample of San Diego city deeds from 1910 to 1950 found that every single one had a racial restriction. Advertisements for San Diego properties from the early 20th century all allude to these racial restrictions. One from 1910 for lots in Inspiration Heights, which is now part of Mission Hills, says the area has the necessary restrictions and is planned and protected for particular people. In other words, white and affluent. Black, Asian, Latino, and Jewish San Diegans were all but locked out of the city's signature neighborhoods like La Jolla, North Park, and Mission Valley, and instead purposely segregated into southeast neighborhoods. In 1948, the Supreme Court struck down the legality of racially restrictive covenants. But as we see with Dew's home, they continued into the 50s, as did the patterns of racial segregation that they, in concert with redlining, steering, and zoning, created. Patterns that continue to shape San Diego today. It's not hard to see, says Denise Mathis, president of the California Association of Real Estate Brokers.
Whether you're African American, Hispanic, or white, we still use the Interstate 8 as the dividing mark. Okay, so south of the 8, you expect one thing, and north of the 8, you expect something else.
San Diego is more segregated today than it was 30 years ago, according to a recent UC Berkeley study. And much of the segregation is still marked by Interstate 8, with more wealthy, whiter communities in the north. As a black woman from San Diego, Mathis's own grandfather was impacted by housing discrimination that continued long after racially restrictive covenants became illegal.
I always remember him telling us that he looked at a house right outside of Mission Valley on top of the hill, and he was told he could not purchase there. Okay, so what would that home in Mission Valley be worth that I could have inherited compared to the home that they steered him to buy in Oak Park? Where would my wealth be?
Today, homeownership plays a bigger role in creating wealth for black families than for white families, but gaps continue to persist. Only 30% of black San Diegans own their homes, compared to 61% of white people in San Diego, according to a 2018 Redfin study.
There needs to be more evolution of thought as to the impacts of some of the rules and regulations of the past that kind of determine where your socioeconomic position is today.
It's why Michael Dew wants more people to know about racially restrictive covenants like the one in his home. The home his grandfathers, both veterans, couldn't have bought. The overt housing discrimination they faced may have been illegal for decades, but we're still a long way from understanding, let alone undoing, the generational harm these practices have caused. Cristina Kim, KPBS News.